Scapula is the world's worst villain. Ugh, and I do mean the worst. Since November of 2008, I have been writing and drawing the webcomic adventures of a grouchy supervillain named Scapula and his creepy cohorts, the sinister monster Doom Legion. For the 6-year anniversary of the webcomic's first posting, I'm putting together the very best collection of comics that I have ever created, appropriately titled Scapula, World's Worst Villain. This 150-page volume contains all of the stories from the series 2013 relaunch onward. You'll see Scapula face gangsters, roller derby girls, giant monsters, hordes of hippies, snotty emo kids, mummy zombies! What? Mummy zombies? Oh, okay. Mummy zombies! And much more. Thanks for listening, and keep supporting the bad guy. Hello, creepy creature kids and webcomic weirdos. This is your old buddy Aiden, and today we are doing a special commentary video to celebrate Scapula, World's Worst Villain. If you'd like to grab this book for yourself, it is available in the Scapula bookstore, along with all the other books in the series. Buying the books really helps me out a lot, but hey, if you're not in a tree-killing mood, you can also get the free PDF digital download version when you join in Scapula Comics on Patreon. We've got a lot of old crap to dig through, so let's just get the show started. So first things first, a super quick bit of history. The Scapula webcomic from 2008 to 2012 ran 1 day a week on Sundays, a full-color page. Around 2012, I realized that the only way this comic was going to hit it big, hopefully, was to increase the update schedule. So, starting in 2013, I began the huge undertaking of not only doing the full-color Sunday page, but also doing 3 daily strips, which ran during the week. This was a massive, massive undertaking, and I nearly ground myself down to the bone, but the comic did get a boost in readers, and a lot of really good stories came out afterwards. And I did my very first Kickstarter to collect the first 2 years of this new schedule into a book called World's Worst Villain. Now, does this hold up years later? Let's find out. Alright, here we go. Patrons, open up your PDF. Everyone else, if you're a good old-fashioned tree killer, open up your nice copy of Scapula, World's Worst Villain. In the introduction to this video, I had mentioned that the big change with Scapula around this point was it stopped being a once-a-week strip and started updating 4 days a week, which was a huge damn deal. The other big change that I should address here is regarding the art style and the production of these comics. Prior to this, Scapula had been drawn on paper and scanned into the computer, after which point I would do like the lettering and the colors all in Photoshop or whatnot. Because the update schedule was such a huge undertaking, I knew that if I continued working on paper, it would just add lots and lots of time, because the amount of time it took to clean up drawings being scanned it took a while. And not only that, it used up a lot of materials too, even just doing it once a week. With a 4-day-a-week schedule, I just knew you gotta go cheaper and more efficient, and this is around the point when Scapula became entirely digital. The other thing that had changed around that point too was that the drawing style was simplified to a greater degree because I had to turn out a lot more comics. But this drawing style that began in 2013 with the 4-day-week schedule was a lot more animated and a lot more simplified, just to make the process a lot easier and so I can get all these comics done without missing any deadlines. It's very strange for me to look back on this style now because it did change a lot once I had stopped doing the webcomic and started doing more of the comic book specials again. So first things first, we're beginning with a Sunday page, kind of like the way it was before, only this time entirely digital. Even though this was not a new start in continuity, we are continuing the continuity pretty much where it had left off from the year before. With that said, I still felt like it was kind of important to reintroduce people to Scapula, just on the odd chance that you were not a regular reader, you were just jumping in. That was one of the tricky things about doing this back in the webcomic days. It was very difficult to have new readers jump into your series unless if you were doing a gag-a-day comic, which Scapula most definitely was not. Even though the archives were right there, still doing whatever you could to ease new readers in was always a challenge. But anyway, this was just as good a way to start as any, just Scapula getting himself ready for the day ahead. We have references to Alice Cooper, Vincent Price, steel-toed boots, lots of coffee, monster movies, nice black clothes. Use what you know. This was obviously a lot of my daily routine is going in here, along with polishing myself. Don't act like you don't do it! Sums up with just a great big hello hooray moment. Hello San Francisco, you ready to rock? It's not much of a catchphrase, but whatever, it's Scapula, he's trying. We jump ahead to our first daily strip. The nice thing about doing the dailies was that it finally gave ample time to build out a story and spend time with the characters, which was something that I had wanted to do. And having the 4-day-a-week update schedule may have been a lot of work on my part, but I knew that it would give me a lot more room, not only to expand on the stories, but just to spend time with some of these characters, because I felt a lot of them really did need time dedicated to them. A couple of characters we're reintroducing ourselves to. Babris had not been seen in a long time, probably since the last Sinister Monster Doom Legion story when he was arrested, and we're introduced sort of to a character named Kenpachiro Nakajima. My fellow Godzilla fans, pretty obvious where that name comes from. But let's jump ahead to another villain we hadn't seen in a while, and that is Hypnasia. Now, Hypnasia may not have too many actual hypnotic skills, but he has some other talents, and that is doing stuff to get political favors to get those last two guys released. That's an even dirtier joke than the polishing yourself joke from earlier on. I don't think anybody complained. I doubt there were a lot of children reading this site. And if there were children reading this site, guess what? They're not kids anymore, because this is over a decade later. Hi guys, I ruined your childhood. In the car with Hypnasia is another villain, of course, and that is Mr. Mustache Janitor Man, Scapula in disguise. This is a costume that he wore before. So we have a car full of villains. There's Scapula, Hypnasia, Babris, and guess who that geek is? That's Tygadactyl? Now, my patrons who have watched the video for the original 2007 zine know that Tygadactyl was probably subject to more retcons than any other character in Scapula history. In this case, this is referring to the fact that Tygadactyl, back in the Sinister Monster Doom Legion story, towards the end of that, the big gag was, the reveal was, when he took off his mask, he was actually Hollywood makeup legend Rick Baker. That was just a quick, cheap little gag done at the time. There was not really any thought about the future or continuity or even basic logic with that, and I realized afterwards that I really wrote myself into a corner. And thankfully I never did it again until years later with Ultra Bombastico, but he doesn't count. This was about kind of untangling that mess and establishing that Tygadactyl was an original character and not just a quick gag or a quick throwaway reference. So we explain really quickly here, not a hell of a lot of sense being made that somehow Rick Baker and a Japanese stuntman created the Tygadactyl persona, somehow Rick Baker went nuts, somehow Rick Baker ended up in the costume, somehow Rick Baker was flying around, and somehow Rick Baker was arrested, and somehow Rick Baker was sent back to Hollywood. Doesn't make much sense, but we got it out of the way in 3 panels. In the time since this stupid comic came out, I have met Rick Baker. Very nice guy, very talented artist, and he has more than earned his retirement in Hollywood. Let's move on. So here we are, home sweet home in the Wax Museum. Scapula's Wax Museum is probably one of my very favorite things that got added into the series. It had been introduced the year before in the Bone China story. During that entire year of 2012, the Wax Museum was under construction. You guys who have read that story will remember that it was originally populated with wax dummies of celebrities. And I hate that. Anytime I go to a wax museum, I'm going for the monsters, I'm going for the hollow horrors, and I better see something awesome instead of celebrities, which are not awesome. The Wax Museum lair, so not only was it visually interesting and in theme with Scapula, who is a big horror movie nerd, it also let me pay homage to a lot of the horror movie monsters that had inspired me along the way, but doing it in a way that was just sort of in the background, not taking too much attention. I didn't want to do what like nearly every other horror comic does, where you just take the universal monsters and you repurpose them a little, so that way you have a Dracula character, a Frankenstein, a Wolfman, a mummy, a creature. It was just a little indulgent from me to be able to draw Scapula and his crew alongside Frankenstein and the Wolfman and have your Halloween candy and eat it too. We've heard earlier on the real names of Babris and Tygadactyl, and right now we are going to get the real names of a couple of other of our villains. That's Throgor and Toxic, and their real names here being Roy and Larry. It feels really weird to me looking back on this now and using the characters' real names, because I think in the end it was not necessary. necessary. The idea at the time, I think, was just sort of establish a familiarity with them, with each other, and for readers to get to know them and know that there was a little bit more to them than just what they had seen before, which is the villain personas. Kind of name dropping them by their Christian names, so to speak, was probably not necessary. I think this was probably like one of the last times their real names were ever mentioned. From here on in, Throgor was Throgor, Toxic was Toxic. You get the idea.
You better watch your scrote-sucking mouth, fruit.
Wow, that's homophobic. We can bring back the shame box for that. I'm really sorry. I was young and dumb and full of dumb. And once again, going back to just adult humor and offensive jokes and things like that. Now I'm old and I'm clean and I'm nice and I make good family circus kind of humor. I would not write dialogue like that anymore. The other thing I could point out here is that another big mistake, aside from the naughty language, is there's some weird things going on with the perspective here, where if you look at the height of that ceiling compared to these guys, if they stood up, they look like they would bang their heads on that ceiling. It looks like that thing has got to be like a sub-basement room with a ceiling that's only 5 feet off the ground. That's some pretty wonky perspective there, and I think I did that to give the idea that Throgor was really huge. The problem, though, is that Toxic is also drawn too big, so they both look like they're crammed in these itty-bitty corridors, and it's like, bunk, you'd hit your head. There's even more weird perspective in the panel right afterwards, where if you look at them far away and you look at where Scapula is perspective-wise, the only way that would make sense is if either Scapula is coming up out of stairs from the basement, if Scapula is sitting down on the ground, or if Scapula is like Johnny Eck and walking around on his arms. That perspective is really weird if you really think about it. The composition of getting 6 characters into one teeny tiny little panel gets tricky. And let's face it, if you're making comics, if you're making films, a lot of times a little fudging is fine. Let's move beyond that. Getting the crew back together. Scapula is back. Hypnasia, Barbarous, Toxic, Tygodactyl, Throgor, and... who is that guy? There's a shadow lurking in the corner, and we realize that our sextet is actually a septet? Is that what you call 7 characters? Who cares? We have our brand new character joining the crew. Toxic brings along his buddy of sorts named Bombastar. Now, Bombastar's roots go back pretty far. Back in 2005, 2006, before the Scapula comic had launched with the zine, I was developing a lot of villain concepts. And I think, as I had mentioned in one of these videos before, a lot of these villain concepts ranged from kind of serious to totally insane and bizarre, wacky out there. Some of these characters really look like they would have fit in more with the Tick or Freakazoid than they would have fit in with a Marvel comic. Bombastar's roots were going back to a villain whose head was like a cartoon bomb. No logic how. It wasn't like a mask. It's like his head was an actual bomb. I didn't go through with that concept because it seemed a little too silly to me. Even for a comic like this. But here's the thing, is that it turns out it's a damn good thing that I didn't go through with that, because that exact same concept had been done decades before. Not just decades before Scapula, decades before I was born, in a little comic within a comic done by Al Cap in Fearless Fosdick within the pages of Lil Abner. That exact same bomb head or bomb face, something like that, it had been done. And I didn't know about that because I wasn't familiar with Fearless Fosdick or Lil Abner at the time. I since have read Fearless Fosdick, and it's a really goddamn good comic, and I am so happy that I didn't inadvertently plagiarize it, because I would have felt like a total douche. You never know if someone out there would have recognized it and said, "Hey, that's it! You ripped that off of Al Cap!" I didn't go through with it, and it's a good thing I didn't, because it did give that concept also time to develop and reemerge as Bombastar. Is Bombastar still derivative? Kind of, sort of, in a way that you wouldn't think so. If you read some of this drawl here, especially if you read it out loud in a certain voice, when you hear, "Great, thanks for finally noticing me, Toxic. You dragged me all the way out here, then no one talks to me for an hour." If that kind of drawl sounds kind of familiar, it is a reference to one of the best sci-fi comedies of all time, which is, of course, Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. A lot of Bombastar is sort of taken from Marvin the Paranoid Android. Adams did help me a lot with my writing style. There were some, it may not be too obvious in the comics, but if you read some of the prose stories of Scapula that came out years and years later, there is a very strong Douglas Adams influence on that. Now, Bombastar also had some other references to it that are less comical, and that was to myself. I have dealt a long time with insecurities like depression and anxiety and stuff like that, and being worried about lots of problems in life. And like a lot of people who have that sort of thing, you worry a lot about how other people see you, and you start worrying a lot about whether or not you're being a burden to others or pestering others with your problems, and it really weighs on you. I think a lot of Bombaster here was me sort of trying to deal with that by kind of making fun of it, but at the same time, I really worried now about whether or not it feels like I was being insensitive to people who struggle with depression. So hopefully that wasn't the case. For me, it was a little cathartic. Hopefully people out there kind of got to deal with Bombaster. There is a lot of genuine sympathy for the guy too. But of course, Bombaster isn't all sadness and woe. There's also a lot of pent-up rage in him. Why would such a character be brought into Scapula's crew? Well, Toxic's a little devious as well. He knows that this guy is just an inch away from hitting his breaking point. Let's move on to a very difficult page. Let's call it a big fat exposition dump. Like I was saying earlier about making sure that a lot of new readers were informed about what had happened in the past if they had not yet gone through the archives, or if they were just picking up the book for the first time without having read any of the other ones. Because this story is building upon previous continuity and previous characters, you do need to spend some time just to quickly reiterate what's going on, and that can be a little difficult. This is a tough page to get through, I do understand. There's no jokes on this page. There's nothing particularly exciting or funny happening. This is really just establishing where our character of Dr. Zhirakov is going to enter the story and what she's got in her mind. She right now is recapping a lot of Scapula history going back to the beginning of the webcomic. That background there is taken from the first Sunday. We cut to the behemoth attack from the 2012 Sinister Monster storyline, and we're also showing that Zhirakov is taking this all very seriously. We are basically sowing seeds right now for what Zhirakov is going to do later. There's also a quick little info dropping here, not super important, but I guess it's sort of explaining why Scapula is so under the radar despite all of the things he's done, like piloting a big robot brontosaurus through downtown. The Bone China story made a really quick passing reference to the fact that why Scapula is just so disregarded even by the authorities. He's seen as so much of a non-threat that he actually does get away with a lot that would have most any other criminal locked away for life. Of course, that's a bit of logic that Zhirakov herself is really trying to hammer home to this city council, but they're just not having it. And if she's not going to be able to do that through the government, through the legal way, she's just going to have to do it some other way. But whatever, back to the silly stuff. Here's Scapula making a very silly face. Let's finally get down to business. Scapula does have a reason for bringing all these guys back together again, especially in light of their previous failures. A little bit of his pitch is kind of similar to the same pitch he gave these guys in the very first Scapula zine. Scapula says that they're going to make a name for themselves at last, and how they're going to do that is we advertise. Some webcomic readers thought he meant that literally, like he was going to buy commercial airtime or whatnot, or he was going to use Project Wonderful, which is what a lot of us webcomic readers used back in those days. He meant that in the reputation sense. I would imagine a lot of people who are involved in organized crime try to keep a low profile, but in Scapula's case, it's different because they know that they're monsters, they know that they're weirdos, and they know that having a spooky, scary, monstery reputation is actually to their benefit. Scapula's big master plan is to go out into some big, bright, gaily lit event in San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco for a very, very long time, and there were always lots of events like this where, you know, people are dressing up and having a good time and being so happy with themselves and whatnot. That's totally fine. I think at the time I was very cynical towards stuff like that because I was a freak and an outcast and a weirdo and a loner and all that. It's easy for me to be a little cynical of stuff like this. The party's going on, everybody's having a great time, but it's going to be cut off immediately by a big gaseous attack. That big gas cloud is coming from Toxic. Scapula takes the mic. He is going to be the showman he's always wanted to be. Rock you all to death! And Scapula does something that I think is problematic. Mass shootings were something that were not unknown of at the time, and of course they've only gotten more and more common, I'm very sorry to say. I think even Scapula would realize that too, and I think to that end, if he really was going to do something like this, I think he would have come up with something a little more creative than firing a gun into the crowd. And some of the stuff he does later in the same book, there is more stuff like robot monsters and Halloween antics and spook shows and things like that. I do wish he had done something more like that here. Let's go to an issue in this next page, and that is a great big daunting block of text. This gigantic paragraph here in the second panel is such an almost indecipherable wall of text to get through, to the point where there's a typo in there that nobody noticed for nearly a decade. This was an important lesson to me, looking at this afterwards and realizing that big blocks of text like that are very tough on readers. After this, I made it a rule to myself that from here on in, speech balloons could only contain 2 sentences of text. Maybe 3 sentences tops if those sentences were kept short, but 2 sentences were about as much as a person could read without their eyes just glazing over it. Yes, this big block of text is technically 2 sentences. They are very long run-on sentences, but if I was doing this now, each sentence would have occupied a different balloon, and maybe I would have chopped down on a lot of that too. We go to our next page, and here's a weird pose from Scapula, doing something that somebody could have very easily photoshopped. Something very wrong in there. But the more important thing going on with this page here is just talking about the difference between Scapula's big act and the amount of money it costs to make that big act. A lot of artists and a lot of performers I know do face this issue sometimes, especially when you're an indie. A lot of times the amount that you spend to make your art, to make your craft, to make your show is not equitable with the amount that you reap in. A lot of times your profits are very low, a lot of times your profits are non-existent, and it is very common for a lot of creators like myself to sink money into something that doesn't even always break even. A lot of times it will just suck up money. Toxic here is sort of that voice of reason, that left brain rationale that is just saying, why are we sinking so much money into something that did not cover its cost? Scapula, however, the more creative, attention-seeking right brain side of it is just saying this isn't about the money, this is about the show, the respect, the craft, the art, the showmanship, all that other stuff that the voice of reason is just saying, I'd rather have the money. It's up to you and what kind of person you are, what kind of a creator you are, that is going to decide which is more important. If you're doing it right, they're both equal. If you're doing it right, then you're making a profit and having a good time and all that stuff too. But for a lot of us out there, a lot of my fellow comic creators, and what the heck, me, a lot of times, yeah, the art and the show is a lot more important. Just don't quit your day job. In strolls Hypnasia, and one of the interesting things here is Hypnasia's outfit. I had mentioned before about using the real names of the characters and just sort of establishing that familiarity with them. One of the things that I had wanted to do more often was to show these guys outside of their costumes, which I think was a little more interesting than just name-dropping their real names. It was showing that they had lives outside of their daily villainy. Some characters I wanted to start showing outside of their costumes. Scapula was one of them. We'll see Scapula in more casual wear later on in the book. But more than anyone, I think Hypnasia would be the one with the biggest wardrobe. So Hypnasia here is seen in a bit more of a goth industrial outfit, which is very fitting for him, and it was a nice opportunity to just show that I think if any Sinister Monster member had a life outside of that crew, it was Hypnasia. I think I remember at the time when this strip posted, one of the readers photoshopped that middle panel drawing of Hypnasia into some fake perfume ad or fashion wear ad, which I thought was very cute. And I always liked it when readers were getting involved in making jokes and kind of familiarizing themselves with the characters. This was also sort of the beginning of Scapula and Hypnasia's relationship, and that was the relationship between Scapula and Hypnasia. It's very, very multi-layered, and you can probably, I'm gonna let a lot of you decide of it, what you want to make of it, and what they are to each other, how they see each other, and whether or not they are seeing eye to eye, or if one of them is seeing the other in a very different light. It's pretty obvious, but you can figure it out for yourselves. Any case, yeah, we have a lot of this animosity where Scapula's being gruff and grumpy towards Hypnasia's flirtatiousness and enthusiasm and stuff like that, but in the end, when they do connect over, everybody's scared as hell of us! Woo! Here we go, back to Jarakov, back to more exposition and how much she sees Scapula as an enemy to deal with. Scapula may be the protagonist of the comic, but he's still a villain, and he's still doing the wrong thing. And of course, a lot of his opposing forces are either going to be other criminals like Gemini or whatnot, and some of them are going to be characters with legitimate gripes against him. Jarakov here, her motivations are, I think they're good. She is motivated by the right thing, but whether or not she's going about it in the right way depends on you and your morals and how you see this character. I'll let you decide that for yourselves. Jarakov has assembled a crew of women. Now, the battle of the sexes has been something that has gone on with Scapula since the very beginning of the series. And even though that isn't anything new to cartoons and comics, a lot of the angle of boys against girls, the title of the story, has been very common. Someone had pointed out to me the interesting thing that is all of Scapula's opponents in this particular book were women. That was not intentional, it just turned out that way by coincidence. You know, it's just kind of weird how a lot of that turned out. I'll let you read whatever you want into that for yourselves, because this was not done with any misogynist intent. This was not done with any messages given across. This is not any big Dave Sim type of rant against women. That's just the way it turned out, and methinks the idiot doth protest too much, so let's just get back to the comic. A lot of the crew here we're going to be seeing a little more one by one in the panels, in the pages that follow. One of the ones I want to point out who doesn't get a hell of a lot of time here is the villain on the far right. Her name is Crybaby. Crybaby is based on La Llorona, and she is a character I really wish I had dedicated more stories to. She had appeared once before, and this is pretty much her last story, and that's a shame too, because it was a very fun design. It was a very legitimately creepy character, which, let's face it, this comic could have used more of. But sadly, I think it was just a lot of the limitations of a character who did not speak was what made it difficult. We've had some time establishing what makes Jarakov tick and why she's going after Scapula, but let's, a little more members of this coven, repeating some of the past for people who had not been familiar with these characters or who had not seen these characters in a long time, because some of them hadn't appeared in a while. Let's start off with Mona Noire. Mona Noire is a character who, even though she is very much a mean girl, she is very snotty, she also has a legitimate gripe with these freaky characters who have done some pretty appalling things towards her. Not only the sinister monsters, but even Dada Man. If exposition dumps are not your thing, then this is a great big one, because I can't think of any other aspect of this comic that required so much backstory and so much having to remind viewers than Mira Mira in her duplication operation, which every single time this came up in the future of the series, and it came up a lot too. This was what led to Deviant Gemini and Diosukuri and a lot of story elements that would persist with Scapula all the way up until the end. But every single time it came up, you had to sort of remind readers what it was. Here we are now, not just repeating the duplication operation, but repeating what had happened too, with the big split between the Mira Mira clone factions. But whatever, and here of course is big, lovable, goofy, silly Knuckle Sam. She was still very popular with readers, as I recall, and she was a lot of fun to write, a lot of fun to draw, and she had a lot of personality that was very unique to her outside of the other villains. So her motivations here are love, her motivations are revenge. She is just probably the most emotional character in the series, and that's what made her so much fun to write and draw. As for whether or not Little Miss Miserable agrees after getting a bone-crushing bear hug like that, well, oh, she's recovered by the very next panel. I've already explained where Little Miss Miserable comes from. Hi, Ashley. I hope you're watching this. Enough exposition. It is time for some action at last. Before they go after Scapula and his crew, they're going to have a test run with a villain who had not been seen in a long, long time, and that is, of course, Dr. Caliban. Dr. Caliban had not been seen in a very, very long time, and I think that's because I wasn't really sure if he was going to be a recurring character or not. This, of course, is nearly a decade before he had gotten his own solo series, so to speak. This was coming back to the character, but just to sort of throw him under the bus. I don't even think at this point I wasn't sure if he was going to come back even after this page. This was also the introduction that Dr. Caliban was now a robotics expert. He hadn't been before, but if that machine he's writing in looks derivative, it's because I was just coming to terms with the fact that, yeah, Dr. Caliban was very much inspired by one of my favorite comic book supervillains, Dr. Octopus. I've mentioned too many times before what a big Steve Ditko fan I am, so I won't go into that again. Dr. Caliban is called out by his old nemesis, Mona Noire! Of course, you remember the Sicko Six story. They've had a long, long history together that's being called up again now, which leads us to this bottom panel here, which has become sort of part of Scapula history. This very silly drawing of Dr. Caliban is a callback to a short horror story I had done years before Scapula. It was, a lot of Dr. Caliban's roots were with this short story, which is about this nerdy little guy who turned into this sort of werewolf type of monster, and the story ends with him being turned back to human and his intended victim getting revenge on him by shoving his butt onto a pole. A quick visual gag, which I ended up liking a lot, that every episode of Dr. Caliban's semi-animated series that came out later on would reference this drawing again. It was just too much fun for me to draw, and I think a lot of the readers liked it too, as long as he didn't think about it too much and how he was stuck to that particular pole. Ooh. And if you need a break from something like that, I don't blame you in the least. So let's take a breather and pry ourselves loose.
This comic book describes a sexual aberration so shocking that I couldn't mention even the scientific term on television. The sexy, crime-worshipping violence of certain comic books.
Very upsetting, that it has a bad moral effect, and that it is directly responsible for a substantial amount of juvenile delinquency and child crime.
Okay, we are back with part 2, and... oh god, not again!
I'm back!
This is such a misogynist story that we really do need a woman's perspective, and since I don't really seem to know any women, I'm just gonna have to do. So here we go with part 2 of Boys Against Girls. Now, the very first thing that you come to the conclusion of as a woman reading this comic is, boys are gross! And it's definitely true here. Look at Throgor's sloppy table habits. Oh my god. And we just got a quick little recap saying that Dr. Caliban got his butt kicked and that Scapula's not really all that concerned. Moving on, Scapula's putting together his big plan and then sending them off on their merry way to go enjoy their weekend. Unless if you're a bumbaster, in which case you don't have a place to stay. I do like this expression on Scapula here. It's both angry and stupid looking. Taking down Dr. Caliban is one thing, but let's go after some bigger fish. And those of you guys who watched the Scarecrow Spook Show video will remember that I was mentioning just the random running gag that I have of a character just staring at another character's butt. And this is probably one of the most obvious examples where Little Miss Miserable is checking on the very ample backside of Knuckle Sam, and you know, if you were there, you'd be looking at it too. We cut to Daly City, the home of Roy, better known as Toxic. I think I had mentioned sometime during the Sunday Comics years that Toxic did have kids and an ex-wife. I don't remember when, but this is the first time we've ever seen them. And as we can see, Toxic's a bit of a deadbeat dad, but as some of the webcomic readers pointed out, he's not a complete deadbeat dad because at least he's spending time with his kids, actually in the same room with them, actually communicating with them, even if he's kind of in a gruff mood because there's not a hell of a lot of money in his account for anything other than takeout Chinese. Let's face it, he's not making a ton of money as either Toxic or as a blue-collar worker, so sorry, dude. Yeah, so this is the first appearance of his kids. I don't remember if they have names or not. It doesn't matter because I'm also pretty sure this is the only time they ever appeared. We have a knock at the door, and we finally get to meet Toxic's ex-wife. This is actually her only appearance, too. She's joined the coven, but just for this one strip, and just to see Toxic get his comeuppance. As soon as he gets that beating, his kids don't particularly seem to care much, either because he's not much of a dad or because kids are jerks. It's a little bit of both. So here we have Tygodactyl, and this is the very first time Tygodactyl has ever spoken. I think I had originally penciled this as Hypnasia coming and checking out the damage that had been done to Toxic in his place, but then just to give Tygodactyl some bit of business, and actually give him some dialogue, I used him here. Tygodactyl is speaking in broken English. I don't know if that's politically incorrect or not, but you know what? If you can speak more than one language, you have a major advantage over me, because God knows if I sound like this much of an idiot in English, I don't know what I would sound like in any other language. Needless to say, Tygodactyl probably does a much better job being bilingual, or trilingual if you include Tygodactyl speak. Back to the Wax Museum lair, back to more of those cool statues that allow me to sneak in some famous monsters that probably have copyrights to them. Scapula and Knuckle Sam, of course, have a long and very bad history together, and it turns out not just him either. Throgor also had a very unfortunate run-in with Knuckle Sam before. She beat him in a pretty brutal fight, as you guys remember from the last story in the Sunday Comics years. Where do we find Knuckle Sam? Well, she's going to be at her roller derby team tonight. Why didn't Hypnasia mention that before? Because you didn't ask me, Grumpus. Such a little bitch, that Hypnasia. Ugh. Get ready to move as he grabs some weaponry, and we head on off to our next big location. And here we have a derby game. Derby is something that we have a lot of here in Southern California, and I do know a lot of derby girls. They're usually very cool people when they're not going around in a circle and shoving each other around. There's some cameos here in the audience based on one of my very favorite TV shows of all time. You guys who have watched my creature show drawing series know that I've mentioned Mystery Science Theater 3000 many, many times because it's one of my favorite shows ever. And I figured as long as we had an audience watching something, we might as well get Tom, Mike, and Crow in there. Sneaking around. Not only there's a chance for revenge, there's also a chance to see ladies in the locker room. Ooh, boys are dirty. Now, if you sneak up on Knuckle Sam in the middle of undress, you really are running the risk of a butt kicking, but in this case, it's a trap! And we meet the Derby Devil dolls. I've spent a lot of effort on making each of these women individual, despite the fact that in the final reproduced version, they're shrunk down so small that you probably can't even see a lot of them. Are these based on anybody in particular? Actually, no. That's weird because sometimes I sneak in cameos from people I know and sometimes I don't, but in this case, every single one of these roller derby girls were just characters I made up right on the spot. I really wish I had drawn them a little bigger because there's so much that you're missing out of, even if you zoom in on the PDF or whatnot. I'm sorry to say, a lot of those drawings were lost. The only ones I can really seem to point out is this blonde girl going to Hakiba, which is another Mystery Science Theater reference. The Derby Devil dolls take down Throgor, Scapula runs out of the way, and this is actually a pretty significant panel. Not obvious in and of itself, but for a behind-the-scenes point of view. A lot of times throughout the Sunday year, Scapula was a pretty big coward. It was very, very common for him to run away screaming. I had mentioned, I think in the Doubly Dark and Deadly video, that Scapula avoids fights when he can. That's usually just because he's using his brain. But in a lot of the early years, Scapula's cowardice was something that was just constantly used for comedic effect, and I think around this time a lot of the webcomic readers had gotten kind of tired of that. In the original version of this page, which you can see right here, it was finished, inked, and done with Scapula turning on his heels and going It was time to move beyond that gag, and even though every once in a while we do have Scapula still doing the running and screaming thing, I think it was time to give him just a little bit of dignity, little bit. Down goes Throgor, so we've taken down the most physically powerful member of Scapula's crew, and why does Throgor go down so easily? Because he wants to. Running out through the parking lot. This is a frequent trick I use using silhouettes for background elements. I've mentioned way too many times in these drawing videos that I hate drawing backgrounds. That's something a lot of comic artists have in common, is just drawing characters is so much fun than drawing backgrounds and vanishing points and perspective and math. It all comes down to math. If you draw cartoons, math is your enemy. We've got the Mira Miras, Crybaby, and Mono Noire. We have a whole page of foreign language, and I'm absolutely positive that Crybaby Spanish and Mira Miras Japanese is 100% wrong, because I use Google Translate, and anybody who's used Google Translate will know that you're going to get the most bizarre things that come through it. I had mentioned before that I'd sound stupid in any other language than English, and I do sound pretty stupid in English. Christ knows what they are actually saying here, or if they sound like cavemen. If you speak Spanish and you speak Japanese, go right ahead and comment below if it turned out okay. God knows later on in the years during the Memento Mori storyline when I had made attempts to write in German, and some of my German and Austrian readers of the webcomic were thinking, what the hell is the matter with that guy? But let's face it, there's going to be a lot of people looking stupid in just a moment, because Hypnasia reaches inside his bag of treats, and what is the lesson that we learned when we were children? Never take candy from strangers. And nobody is stranger than Hypnasia, so if he hands you something that's candy, you only have yourself to blame. They don't care.
Because girls like candy. We'll do anything for candy.
I am not exactly an expert in the Stanley Owsley School of Medicine, so to speak. But I don't think LSD hits you this fast. I think years later, when this gag appeared again, I had made a reference that it was Hypnosia's patented high-speed blotters, explaining why immediately when a person ingests it, they go through the symptoms. We have a little iron butterfly playing through their heads as Scapula and Hypnosia scurry off. If you were one of those webcomic readers who were asking why didn't Scapula and Hypnosia just kill all those other attackers when they had the chance when they were passed on the concrete, next page. Throgor is down. If you were one of those webcomic readers who are asking, why didn't Knuckle Sam just kill Throgor when she has the chance? Well, this time there's a bit more of an explanation. Dr. Shirokov is just riding the line of how much a vigilante can get away with. We have a little bit of an interim, just a little advice I like to give every now and then for any artists out there. It's kind of a good idea to give your characters a little bit of business when they're just passing on exposition. You notice right here, Hypnosia is just checking on his heels. Why? I guess because they were just doing a lot of running right now, I don't know, but it just seemed more interesting than having them standing around. Bombaster is going to take them out to his auntie's house. Are they going to live? Are they going to die? And are they going to show any gratitude to this poor guy? Because wow, Scapula and Hypnosia are not being very nice to him. Anyway.
Just 1 minute there, dollface. There's something I want to say to these mooks first.
We've had a lot of twists and turns in this particular story so far, so it seems as just as good of a time as any to talk about one of the big influences I had during this time period. There's a lot of influences on Scapula that were pretty consistent all the way through from the beginning to the end. Guys like Steve Ditko, Wallace Wood, Eric Powell, Baron Story, pretty influential throughout the entire series. Some other influences were more important at some times than others. In the commentary for the 2007 original zine, Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale with Batman The Long Halloween was a huge influence on that one, but a lot of that influence kind of faded away when the webcomic came and took over, and with other iterations of Scapula afterwards. For this particular time period, the 4-day-a-week schedule, which had ran through World's Worst Villain and the following book, Memento Mori, the biggest influence on the storytelling around that time was, of course, Chester Gould's immortal Dick Tracy. Huge name in comics, it definitely left its mark. A lot of very talented people worked on it, Chester Gould himself. Rick Fletcher especially was a favorite of mine. One of the biggest inspirations for me to go with the 4-day-a-week update schedule was seeing what Gould did with those stories and seeing the way that stories had sufficient breathing room to do twists and turns and go to all sorts of crazy places. The villain chases were kind of a staple during that time period of the 1940s when a lot of his strongest work came out, and I think you can see a lot of that influence in this particular story, The Boys Against Girls, and seeing where the characters are being chased along from location to location. A lot of the Gould influence was sort of lost when the webcomic ended and I had moved on to the magazine-sized one-shots, but it was still really important for me at the time, so I definitely want to make sure I give credit where credit is due to Gould. Back to you, girl. So, we are heading out to Bombaster's auntie's house over on Sloat Boulevard. For San Francisco natives, that is the big long street that leads all the way down to the zoo and the ocean. Knocks on the door and warns them that his aunt is a bit unstable. Well, she's more than unstable, she is absolutely friggin' cuckoo-lubanza. And if she looks familiar, that's because, of course, we had seen her once before in the notorious Sicko 6 storyline. Wheat Germ! Now, of course, Auntie September was not only the auntie of Bombaster, she's also the auntie of, Mona Noire, which the readers would have known about, but this is coming as news to Scapula and Hypnosia. We have some very, very stretchy animated cartoon poses on Scapula. I had mentioned at the beginning of this video that there was a very different, like almost ready for animation style that the webcomic had gone through at this point. Really wanting to push some of the poses because why not? Let's have fun with it. Hide upstairs! Go! I think some of the webcomic readers did wonder back in the day, why are Scapula and Hypnosia running away from... I don't want to say because running away from women, which is what some of them said, because God knows there are plenty of women who could kick my ass and plenty of women who can kick their asses too. But in this case, I think it's been pretty well established by now that the Coven are pretty tough customers. Without their guns, without their weapons, and without their backup, I think Scapula and Hypnosia are really at a loss here. Uh-oh, Mona and Douglas together. I've talked many times in the other videos about what it's like growing up with siblings and how much they fight each other. You can go check out the Scarecrow Spook Show one for that. Only in this case, this is a very intense sibling rivalry. Oh, the poor guy. And Auntie September, being the responsible caretaker that she is, has a delicious fried squirrel recipe. So now Scapula and Hypnasia are trapped up in the attic. What could make it worse? Hypnasia's got lots of stories to tell. Kinky sex stories. I got plenty of those too, but I'm not going to share them with you like Hypnasia's going to. Okay, I'll tell a really fast one right now. And that's how I didn't have to pay tuition for an entire year. Who's coming on up? Bombaster's coming, and he's brought some help. It's Tigadactyl and Barbarous, but of course he's here to hide them in the attic. Why? I guess Bombaster thought it was a good idea, although God knows it really isn't, because even Scapula calls him out that it's a dumb idea. Well, all 5 of them are going to be shoved up there. As it turns out, Bombaster lives in the attic. Watch those wings, Rodan. Anytime I can name drop one of my favorite famous monsters, I'm gonna do so. So now we have 5 characters in search of an exit. We're here because, and what could make it worse? Well, cheap potty humor. Yep, Barbarous and the fart jokes. That goes way, way back in the series, but whatever, there's a time and a place for fart humor. And oh my god, sorry. And the only thing that makes it any worse is what is probably a very, very offensive reference. Dear Kitty Cat, being trapped in an attic with a diary named Kitty Cat is of course a reference to the Diary of Anna Frank. I don't know if anybody was offended by this because I do not want to make jokes about Anna Frank and anyone else who suffered at the hands of the Nazis. Because God knows this comic has had more than enough friggin' Nazi imagery to make people suspicious. So let's not think about it too much. Mona comes home, and they've been up there for 2 days, although I don't know why. You think they could have snuck out at any time during the day. You think they could have ganged up on Mona. You think they could have done anything other than hide in that attic, but let's face it, maybe Scapula is not really as great of a schemer as he thinks. He's gonna put together a new plan, not on how to get out of there, but how to deal with the Auntie September situation. We must kill the old lady. Now, if that toothy grin on Scapula looks familiar, or if the plan for 5 creepy dudes to kill an old lady, this is of course a reference to a very good movie called The Lady Killers. The original, not the remake. For the love of God, do not watch the remake. But the original version stars Sir Alec Guinness in probably one of his very best performances ever. And throughout that film, he has a very distinct manner of speaking, but also a very noticeable leer he does, where he shows lots of teeth and lots of gums. Yes, this is Wilberforce. Which is what I was going for here. I think some of the webcomic readers got that reference, even though I don't know how Scapula would do a mouth like that, even because he doesn't really have lips, so to speak, or probably not much of lips. It's best not to think about how Scapula's plastic skull works. Either way, when I need to give him an expression like that, I just go ahead and cheat and do it. Okay, who's gonna kill the old lady? Now, you would think that these guys who have murdered before, who have opened fire on a crowd of people before, and who have done all sorts of other terrible deeds throughout the series, wouldn't have any problems with just going downstairs and bumping off a crazy old lady. But as it turns out, it is kind of an issue. From the Lady Killers, which was the short match game. Who's gonna get it? Tigadactyl? Nope. Hypnasia? Nope. One Barbarous? Sorry. Another callback to the Sicko 6 story. And now, who has fate chosen to do the deed? Oh, it was Scapula himself. Will Scapula be able to do it? Well, you guys know by now, the story came out over a decade ago. But whatever, let's take another break and throw some cats out the window.
Ask 10 kids where they got the comic book they're reading. They're reading stories devoted to adultery, to sexual perversion, to horror, to the most despicable of crimes.
Okay, creepy kids, we are gearing up towards the big climax. Now, a lot of the strips in this section are action-oriented and building up the pace and stuff like that, and there's not really a hell of a lot for me to say about action scenes, so some parts we're just going to be kind of breezing through quickly, and some parts we'll be stopping and being a little bit more informative. So let's just jump right in with a murder plot. It's a nice pose on Scapula in that first panel, and the weapon of choice is he never hammered his mind out, he never had that bloody hammer. Why? Because I'm guessing a hammer was pretty much all that was around. We gear up with a big dramatic pose. I love doing shots like that. I should have done more of them. We get here probably one of the single creepiest, grossest drawings in the entire series. In fact, let's see that on close-up. Extreme close-up. Come on, come on. I'll let you just sit and enjoy that for a bit. No. Doing creepy, ugly drawings are always extremely fun to do, and Auntie September has got to be one of the most disturbing characters who ever appeared in the entire Scapula series. And now here's our big mix-up is, she thinks he's a guy named Harold, who apparently was her late husband. You came back from the dead! Horrible screams coming downstairs as Auntie September starts getting a little too familiar with Scapula. You remember earlier on in this video when I was patting myself on the back and saying, cowardly Scapula's gone, screaming Scapula's gone, now we're playing him with more dignity. Well, I lied. When you want to go for comedy, it's like, just go for it. Who the hell cares? And honestly, a lot of these poses here were just so much damn fun to draw that I figured I would rather do big, wacky, cartoony poses. But of course, things are about to get scarier when Mona comes home. Big, over-dramatic close-up shot of Mona is, I've mentioned in probably another one of these videos that a lot of the Nicktoons of the 90s were big influences on my early cartooning skills. And something like this is something you would have seen in like Rocko's Modern Life or Ren and Stimpy, with just like the huge, over-dramatic close-ups with flashing backgrounds, and we get another frightening but funny pose on Auntie September with her false dentures just kind of clacking down as the mouth opens up. That was a lot of fun to do. Tigadactyl, Hypnosia, and Babris are sneaking downstairs in much the manner of children who are afraid of getting in trouble from their parents. Again, refer back to the Sicko 6 storyline and why Babris and the others would know and be afraid of her. These are a couple of fun expressions. Babris and Tigadactyl's got some funny faces on them, and she chases after them with a broom, which leads to this big, long panel here of getting all four of the characters together in one long chase scene. When this particular strip ran, I think some webcomic readers were on board and just getting into the comedy and the silliness and stupidness of it, and some of them thought that it was a bit too much of a stretch of credibility that three supervillains, one of whom is definitely a murderer, would be this terrified of somebody with a broom without any real superpowers other than just being really, really pissed off. Seriousness and silliness kind of jumped back and forth throughout the entire Scapula series. We're going to have a couple more callbacks, again going back to the Sicko 6 storyline. First of all is Tigadactyl mentioning that he doesn't know who Mona Noire is, because of course Tigadactyl had been left out of that storyline. Hypnosia mentions that don't let her near his nipples again, which refers to a very, very, very disturbing moment of that previous story I mentioned. Just a quick one-pager with the Coven in the van. Maybe it's some exposition, maybe it's some character interaction, but it is a page I like a lot. I think one of my biggest regrets with the Boys Against Girls storyline is I didn't give the Coven or the members of the Coven the time that they deserved. Now, we had seen earlier on in this very same story that Scapula and the boys just having interaction time, getting to see their personalities and how they bounce off of each other. Unfortunately, we didn't really get enough of that with the girls in this story. Most of everything we've seen of them before was either them just mentioning how much they hate Scapula or mentioning them, or just seeing them beating him up and chasing him off. Getting to see those personalities clash was a lot of fun to do, and if I could go back and do something a little different with the storyline, I think I would have dedicated a little more time to them. Granted, all the character interaction is just being done technically between two characters, Knuckle Sam and Mira Mira, while Little Miss Miserable and Crybaby basically are the quiet observers, or the balancing between the two extremes. So a lot of what Knuckle Sam and Mira Mira are saying are more callbacks to previous stories, but in this case, it's like very, very convoluted. In particular, they are referencing events that had occurred in two storylines from a couple years before, Science Fiction Doubles Feature and The Gemini Killer. There is a lot of plot to recap, and rather than spending a big chunk of this video just telling about what had happened before, I really recommend you read those two stories. You can find them both in this volume called Fear the Failure, plug, but everything they're talking about here, you'll be able to find in this book in particular. Unfortunately for Knuckle Sam, she wasn't privy to nearly all of that information because it comes as a pretty big surprise to her when she learns that Gemini's not dead, you imbecile! Well, one Gemini was dead, but there's a lot more where that came from, and now that it sinks into Sam's big thick brain, she is out of here because now she knows what she wants and she couldn't care less about chasing after idiots like Scapula. We've got, however, more action to deal with in this particular story. Scapula's down for the count, Auntie September continues her attack, and yet another horrifying, hideous close-up of Auntie September, which I will let you guys see here in extreme close-up. More of the Mona and Douglas rivalry abuse going on here. This is all just building and building and building. We're going to see later. Big cartoony crushing of the helmet. Cartoon logic kind of comes and goes in this series here, and we have had deaths before, and something like this implying that his entire skull has been crushed would mean he's dead, but it was a fun drawing to do. Daffy Duck logic for now. Squash and stretch and all that. He's fine. Scapula crawls his way away somehow. I guess Auntie September had to stop and take her Metamucil. A more horrifying thing is coming through the door. It's the Miramiras and Crybaby in a big dramatic angle. Moving along, Scapula is in a really bad spot right now, which is about to get worse because the Derby Devil dolls have come through the door. They are big, they are tough. Mona mentions that the other three are hiding in the bathroom, and that brings to mind another missed opportunity because that would have been a really funny visual to have drawn, is just Tigodactyl, Babyrus, and Hypnasia just all crammed into the bathroom together. I hate missed opportunities. Refer to the other drawing videos I've done where I've mentioned things that I should have drawn but didn't, but that's gonna bug me for a while because I think that was a really big missed opportunity. But we have bigger things to worry about. Or not bigger, as we're about to see. Now, if the horrible misogynist actions of Scapula and his crew have been bothering you so far, and if the awful things they've done to the women of the strip really bothers you, here's the big comeuppance where one of the most humiliating, horrifying things that can happen to a dude happens right here. What can we say in the poor boy's defense? I guess Scapula's a grower, not a shower. We'll file this in the first chapter of the book, the 10 biggest differences between Scapula and Milton Berle. Now, humiliation with Scapula is something we've been doing for years and years and years on end, so even though he's pretty pissed off right now, he's survived worse. Bombaster, however, is really hit his breaking point. He is blubbering down here, the poor guy. Mona is continuing being a horrible sibling. More dialogue building and building the tension. In big contrast to what I had said earlier about too much dialogue being unreadable, this middle panel here with the 2 paragraphs worth of screaming text is meant to be unreadable. For all intents and purposes, we're just supposed to know that the 2 of them are screaming their heads up, but they're not really saying anything important. But enough shenanigans. Bombaster's had enough, and now it's time for him to do his great big revenge. And we get here this big Sunday page. You can probably see for yourself that it is the same drawing 3 times, with the exception of Bombaster kind of changing his poses. There is a slight difference, though. You can see for yourself where the color and the warmth of the shot decreases from panel to panel to panel. We're getting a little darker, even though Bombaster himself is staying like fully lit and fully saturated. A visual trick to keep things from looking too monotonous. I think my only regret right here is a little similar to something I had said in the Giant Attack Monsters video regarding the Scapula Sloth sequence. Timing done through sound effects. We have the that last part should have been in the second panel, and that third panel there should have had no text whatsoever. It should have just been completely blank. Now, whether or not that would have made your eye skip through it or stop for a beat, maybe all those periods do kind of do the trick of slowing it down. It's all just about playing around. Maybe it works fine the way it is. Maybe it could have been tinkered around with, but whatever. A big pause followed by a great big kablooey. So this is a digital painting down here, and one of the things I should mention was another one of the big differences when we had gone to the 4-day-a-week schedule was coloring. Now, there were a lot of strips to turn out, and even if 3 days of the week those strips were in black and white, there was still a lot of work on my plate, so I was not able to dedicate as much time to colors as I had been during the Sunday years. Yes, I had mentioned some coloring differences with those 3 panels above, but for the most part, a lot of the colors and the tones had been greatly simplified, again, because I had so much more work to do, and there just wasn't time to lavishly actually paint out every single Sunday page. This was an exception though, because this joke would not have worked with just a cartoony mushroom cloud. You really needed to feel like this is a huge friggin' explosion, because the joke doesn't work unless if you're just really stunned by the fact that, turns out Bumbuster had this huge power all along. Now, how he blew up like that, you can throw out some guesses. Maybe he had a ton of TNT like stuffed inside that helmet. Maybe he was a mutant. I don't know. I don't care. Who cares? Thinking about it kills it. Whatever. Big explosion is the payoff, and while Scapula goes flying. And now we cut to the aftermath. Now, everything I've been complaining about drawing environments, definitely a different matter. Once it's an exploded environment, you don't have to worry about stuff like two-point perspective or whatnot. Drawing debris is a lot easier and a lot more fun, because I like to draw chaos. Now, miraculously, somehow Scapula has survived without being shredded to pieces or having every bone in his body broken. But that's also somehow magically true of our three guys who were hiding in what is presumably a lead-lined bathroom down inside of the bomb shelter. I don't know, they all survived. Just like Scapula himself says, I don't know how, and I no longer care. One last hand reaching out of the debris, and it is Little Miss Miserable. Somehow she's fine, because we don't want to see anything happen to Little Miss Miserable, do we? No, we love her. Well, Scapula doesn't. He's gonna grab her and force some information out of her. Bye, Ashley. Let's move along. Coming down and getting things back to normal. We've got a couple of kidnapped members to recover. Scapula kicks open the door and he sees the horrible fate that has come to Toxic and Throgor. They have been tied up and forced to watch Moulin Rouge. This is a callback, of course, to a similar punishment that Dr. Shirokov had given Scapula himself when she forced him to watch Mamma Mia. And my one regret in the series is that there should have been one more time afterwards where she would have forced him to watch Love Actually, which has got to be one of the most horrible movies I have ever seen in my entire life. Oh, back to the comic. Now, the thing about the Ludovico Castrato thing that Scapula's mentioning is, yes, number one, it is a way for him to know that this was Dr. Shirokov behind it all along. The problem that kind of bugs me, though, is I didn't realize it at the time, but this is another case where I had subliminally swiped a joke. One of my biggest influences, Eric Powell, had done this years before in The Goon, where characters had been tied down and forced to watch another awful movie. I think it was, in that case, First Wives Club or something like that, so I really hate it when I accidentally copy people. I'm going to give credit where credit is due. Eric Powell is an amazing artist and writer. Definitely go check out The Goon if you haven't already. Let's take our big fat boys home. They've had a hell of a day. Everybody's tired, everybody's dirty, and we are going to wander through a couple of environment shots that actually did turn out kind of decent. This is just walking through the city streets late at night, but for some, I think maybe it's the colors of it. This panel actually turned out nice, and the next panel I actually really do like. This is a cityscape that is actually, oddly enough, drawn with no perspective whatsoever, not even any line work. It's all just done with atmosphere and colors. As much as I hate drawing perspective or whatnot, I actually do like doing stuff like this. Little Miss Miserable has gone back to Shirokov, mentioning the fates of some of the crew. Mona, the Miramiras, Crybaby, and the Derby Girls all went to the hospital. The interesting part about that is Mona's fate was originally something we were going to see a lot sooner. Those of you guys who have the follow-up book to World's Worst Villain, which is Memento Mori, plug, will know that there is a deleted scene regarding Mona's fate after the events of this huge explosion. That scene was cut out, and you would have to wait until years later, until 2022, with Scapula Greatest Freak Show of All, to finally find out what had happened to her. Dr. Shirokov, what she has to say on the matter? Well, she's learned a lot of important lessons, which apparently involves signs and stickers and buttons, which gets Little Miss Miserable all happy. What the heck? Our happy next day, and we have here one last picture where a certain long-haired, witch-hatted woman gets a flyer. What I had been mentioning earlier about the influence of Chester Gould and Dick Tracy was Gould had a very good habit of segueing one long storyline into another, where he would sort of start planting the seeds of his next story just before the previous story had ended. And that's exactly what we're doing here, because of course the next chapter of Scapula World's Worst Villain does involve this witchy-hatted woman. But for here and now, as far as Boys Against Girls goes, that's the end. Up. We're not not done yet, creepy kitties. As a bit of a bonus, we are going to do some extra commentary for another chapter of Scapula, World's Worst Villain. Let's jump ahead quite a bit more in the book, and we're going to discuss one of the shorter chapters, but one of the more significant ones, called Scapulajugend. So, yeah, first of all, that title is very obviously a reference to the little jerk face with the J. Jonah Jameson mustache who was killed off in this comic, or somebody who was impersonating him was killed off in this comic if you jump way, way back. Anyway, let's begin. First of all, we start off with a couple of old characters, including a very old character named Inspector Farley. Now, in the commentary I did for Scapula Doubly Dark and Deadly, I had mentioned that Inspector Farley goes way, way back to a high school comic I had done, and I had also mentioned in that video that his inclusion in the Scapula series never really panned out the way I had wanted it to. This was basically one of his very last appearances for a long, long time until he made a random cameo in Doubly Dark and Deadly. The kid he's screaming at, though, who we'll be seeing a little more in just a moment, is his son Harkin. Harkin first appeared in the identity theft story as part of the emo band named Scapula, and much, much later on we retroactively showed that he was Inspector Farley's son. The last time Harkin and his dad are seen together, Harkin here was partially redesigned. His look here was largely based on an actor in this Polish film called At Suicide Room, or just Suicide Room. For the life of me, I could not pronounce its name in Polish. He's going to encounter a couple of new characters. First of all, there's Bill, completely based on Bill Schaefer, the owner of the Hyena Gallery over in Burbank. If you guys want to support spooky art and crime art and crazy art like that, please visit the Hyena Gallery. Bill's a super guy. We have a character who makes her very first appearance here, and at the time I did not foresee this character becoming a big deal. This, of course, is Nas. Nas has two references. One, it's one letter removed from, you know, that group of people. And Nas is also an Alice Cooper reference. One of the earlier names for the Alice Cooper band was the Nas, which is a slang for Jesus. I think I had mentioned this in the Doubly Dark and Deadly commentary, that Nas was based on a few different sources. A couple of actresses like Fairuza Balk and Lori Petty, but a large part of Nas is an homage or a swipe from Jaime Hernandez from the Love and Rockets series. And Nas is very obviously taken a lot from Hopi Glass, only I think Nas is even more of an idiot. Hopi at least grows up and wises up. Nas, well, those of you who have seen how the Scapula series turns out will know that, well, maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. Anyway, where are they going to? Another silhouette landscape, which saves me from drawing perspective, to meet a very creepy character. I don't know how many webcomic readers would have guessed, but this guy is in fact Scapula himself. In the color version, it's a little more obvious because I yellowed in the eyes, but for the black and white one, he just looks like some dude who's working as the doorman, so to speak, for whatever this meeting is. This is technically the first meeting between Scapula and Nas, although she doesn't know it at the time, and their relationship, of course, would play out very, very differently. Again, refer to the Doubly Dark and Deadly commentary. Going on inside, and what is going on here? Well, how do we describe this? Back when I was in college, I did a cartoon called The Antisocial Social, with a bunch of random goth kids at a convention, and not one of them are speaking to each other. Yeah, anyway. Attention up here, buttheads! This is Scapula, and getting back to that, not just that group of people we were mentioning, but a lot of hate groups and a lot of angry folks who are very easily manipulated by all it takes is a ringleader who knows how to trigger their anger, promise them things that they're never going to fulfill, and basically get a bunch of jerks together to do jerky things. What are they going to get out of it? Well, Scapula's proposing a game of sorts. Outside the doors we have the Miscreants. Now, we are jumping ahead in the book, how the Miscreants come into the story, how he recruits them. You're just going to have to pick up the book if you haven't already. If you do, then you know how they join the fray. They are the replacement henchmen for the sinister monsters who are elsewhere. Again, refer to the book. What does Scapula have in his mind? Well, this game says there are 27 of those kids down there. How many of them are going to survive? Well, you're going to have to kill your way out. This was sort of a reference to Battle Royale, which of course was a big deal at the time. This was Battle Royale would of course be completely swiped for the Hunger Games franchise. What's over here on the table? A bunch of trick-or-treat bags, and each of those bags contains a weapon, again referring to Battle Royale. Nas has got a switchblade. This big muscular looking dude, I'll talk a bit more about him momentarily, gets a wrench, and of course this kid with the ghost mask with way too many holes cut into him says, "I got a rock." You guys who know your comic strips and your animated holiday specials based on comic strips will know immediately what that's from. Scapula, of course, is proposing a fight to the death. Each one of these pissed off kids now has weapons. Each one of these pissed off kids is not especially fond of each other. And the majority of these pissed off kids are seen in a silhouette crowd because silhouettes were such a cost-cutting time saver. I did a lot of that during this era of the webcomic, the 4 days a week stuff, because God, there was so much work to do. But anyway, it's playtime. So now they are going to... Well, fight already! Why? Well, actually, yeah, that's part of the point. Why would these kids immediately jump into battle just for Scapula's benefit? Was his big motivating speech really that motivating to people who are not really motivated by much of anything? It turns out they're going to need a different kind of motivation, and that is pissing off a very popular celebrity with them at the time. Or actually, I should say, this was 2013, and I think by then this guy's 15 minutes of fame had basically run out. This was done long before a lot of the scandals revolving Marilyn Manson had come out, so... maybe this was an edgy thing to say at the time, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. But it's a pretty easy way to divide this crowd. Some of these guys agree, some of these guys disagree, some of these guys don't agree with the language that the other ones are saying. Big surprise, a lot of them are also speaking offensively, and powder kegs like this, the teeniest little spark, poof, is enough to get them all exploded. Big cartoony fight, kids. And we have a little bit of a callback to a strip we seen just a moment ago. I gotta kill, I gotta kick some ass, I gotta rock! There, you see, we did something with Blockhead's catchphrase there. Not everyone, however, is jumping into the fray, chief among them Harkin and Nas. Much like Scapula himself, they're not going to go charging into a fight just yet. They're going to assess the situation and, well, they're mostly going to avoid getting hit, which is admittedly the smartest thing to do in a case like this. Little bit of a tangent now. God, times like these make me really miss a webcomic reader named Lady Jen. And Lady Jen I have spoken about in the Doubly Dark and Deadly video, so I'm not going to go too much into that now. But the quick version is that Lady Jen was a very devoted reader. She had a lot of knowledge about fighting and weapons and stuff like that. She was a bodyguard, and she just had an encyclopedia up in her brain about the best ways to hurt people and avoid getting hurt, which is probably some of the most solid knowledge a person could have. She had a field day with this story in particular. Nearly every single character's weapon she wrote up brilliantly, had the best way to use it or not use it or just give up and run away. Yeah, rest in peace, Lady Jen. I hope you're doing well up there. Because down here we still have a lot more chaos. Chief among them, this big skinhead bastard we had seen earlier. This is a character who later find out is named Russell. Russell, of course, as you can tell with that hair, with the lack of hair and that tattoo, is based on actor Russell Crowe in a very good movie called Romper Stomper, which is, of course, another movie about that group of people. Wow. Oh, man. What the hell was wrong with me at that time? Jesus Christ. But that's still a very good movie, and I was totally fine with paying homage to it then. I'm totally fine paying homage to it now. It's still a solid film. Switchblade in the hand. Ow, that would hurt like hell. Our two little kids run right off, the smart thing to do, but of course the not smart thing to do was probably pissing off this guy because, oh boy, he's out for blood. Big chaos panel here. Once again mentioning the chaos panels, call back to EC and Mad, and sort of a staple of the Scapula series was probably every single one of the Scapula books probably had at least one cartoony chaos scene with a lot of Mad-style chicken fat gags in the background. Yet another cameo, the guy on the far right with the long white hair is based on Dell, the owner of Dark Delicacies. Yet another fine spooky store. Dark Delicacies at last is gone, but you can still find them online and at the occasional convention. On the catwalk we have Scapula and his second in command now, Hypnasia. Scapula is going to call back now the first Halloween gang. Now, if you are a long time Scapula reader, you will know that Scapula's first Halloween gang consisted of 3 gangster type guys in monster masks. And I think I had mentioned this in another one of the commentaries that it never made a hell of a lot of sense on why actual criminal types would be listening to Scapula that early on in his career when he was so incompetent. The Scapula continuity was something that I like to call upon a lot, even though I did sometimes worry whether or not people actually did follow it along. But as it turns out, there were a handful of readers who really did read everything from the beginning to the end, and God bless you guys for doing that, because that really made me feel like this was worth it. Bill goes down, Nas goes down, Harkin is hiding behind, has a very stupid looking face face on him right there, but I still like it now. The hand that's basically the size of Mighty Joe Young. I think I talked in another video about scale issues. We're showing that a big character is that much bigger than a smaller character. Sometimes took on some ridiculous terms. Cases with characters like Thruggo or Agog Magog, but in this case with like a human character here, like Russell, it's like, wow, that's ridiculously huge. I did have a lot of fun with Harkin. Using Harkin here was almost like calling back to earlier Scapula. Like I had said earlier in this video, I didn't really want to do Coward Scapula anymore, but Coward Harkin was a-okay because that was still a large part of his character. Russell here, and kind of a Ringu type of character. This is another kind of mad gag here with a big crowd of all sorts of random folks just shoved in there. Again, chicken fat, Bill Elder kind of stuff. And we have a big pile-on. Cut back outside. I'm willing to bet this is the exact same drawing I did earlier because drawing backgrounds is hard. The sun rises. Who did survive and what will be left of them? All of them did! Every single one of these little stupid idiots survived, although they are in a ton of pain. The Scapula surveying the damage, and, well, he wanted a massacre, he got a massacre. Hypnagea's in a sexy nurse outfit. I mentioned earlier in the video that I wanted to dress up Hypnagia in all sorts of different ways outside of his usual tie-dyed purple costume. It would be revealed much later in the series that Hypnagia has medical knowledge because his mom was a doctor, although for here and now, maybe he just wanted to wear that outfit. The total body count out of 27 fighters, 0 dead, 27 injured. Well, I think one of the webcomic readers pointed out that that's actually pretty good. It shows that these kids know how to take a beating, and no fatalities means that they were lucky enough to survive. But what the heck? He's got 27 kids to recruit now? Why they joined him still after all this? They didn't have anything better to do, I guess. Anyway, they are now the new Halloween gang. Let's talk about the rules of the gang. They're each gonna get a uniform. When you're drawing grunts, you kind of want them to have a uniform look to them because that's the easiest way to establish who the soldiers are and kind of make our upper-ups seem a little more unique. So their uniform consists of, the gray charcoal pea coat. To add a little bit of individuality to them, they are going to get these rubbery monster masks. This is a big staple of horror kid culture, was the rubbery masks that you would see in the back of something like Famous Monsters of Filmland, primarily by Don Post or Ben Cooper or any one of those legendary names that all of us Halloween type folks revere. You can see in this lot here we have some homages to some of the more famous masks such as Shock Monster, Girl Vampire, and of course Tor Johnson. Each of them are going to get a specific code name. We will learn later on that these are all the names of public domain monster movie films because I don't want to get sued. So sorry, Death Black Shadow does not count among them. Let's line up to the recruitment table. Name, Harkin, Agape. Just Nas being a little brat. Typical. Harkin is going to be Adam Age Vampire, which is not one of my favorite horror movies, but whatever. It's a cool name though. That's a freaking cool name. Any questions? Can I get a different nickname? Well, what nickname would you have chosen, huh? The little bitch who wouldn't shut up. I'm sure that's a horror movie. You can see a little bit of Naz's expression here. She likes tormenting Harkin. We will find out later on in this book that Naz and Harkin do briefly date. Step outside. We are going back to the miscreants. This guy here with the gimp mask is named the Homophobe. The Homophobe's power is that he's a homophobe. Well, I don't know if that's a power or not. Some people think that's a power. Actually, in his case, it was a bit more literal. He had an actual phobia about LGBTQ people. The homophobe was also not very smart. 4 months later, we are cutting ahead in time. I very rarely did this in the series. Actually, I'm hard-pressed to remember any other time when I made a huge jump in chronology. This, of course, is done to establish how we turn a bunch of snotty little kids into semi-competent soldiers, although I typically didn't like do big cuts in continuity like that. For here and now, yeah, it's okay. It's drawing environments, like I have mentioned many times before, is a bitch, but in this case I kind of had some more fun with it because one of the things that makes it interesting is texture. In this case, the texture of a shattered down, abandoned, crapped all over building. Even though drawing stuff like perspective wasn't fun, I did have a lot of fun drawing stuff like broken glass, cracks in the wall, dirt and debris everywhere. It does make it a little more interesting. Gives the place a bit of personality, which is of course what you would want from a villain's lair, even a temporary one. Scapula's gonna check on the door, saying hello to our guard, Cindy, who was not drawn to be a woman, but just when I was doing the dialogue, I just randomly decided, hey, why not just make it a woman? We step inside the room and we see a captive. Now, for the sake of this commentary video, it's not gonna make a hell of a lot of sense. If you have the book, or if you have read the book, you'll know a bit more about why Gemini is there, or about the identity as to which Gemini this is. This was after Gemini's cloning operation had really gone into effect, and how she ended up in Scapula's clutches is, that's a lot of backstory to cover, so go read the book. Another part of the reason we've jumped forward in time is to show that Gemini has been sedated and hypnotized for quite a while. That's pretty friggin' horrible. Hypnasia, probably for the first time in the entire series, is actually demonstrating hypnosis skills, and it's a bit more of proper hypnosis, which is something that takes time and concentration and manipulation and stuff like that. He's also showing a little bit of that MD knowledge passed on from mommy. He's probably a little more aware of the symptoms of whether or not the hypnosis is working. Follow the light. What is that light gonna be? Well, it's Christmas lights. I don't know what time of the year you guys are watching this video, but this particular story did happen to run through December. This particular page here was posted on Christmas Day. I think that had only happened once before in the da-da-do-da-do-da story. Figured, what the hell, let's cut away. Story-wise, it serves as a cutting away in time, because we're going to see in a moment what a little bit of time does with the Gemini hypnosis. What is the end result of Gemini's hypnosis? Well, it's pretty weird. This was a bit of a curveball being thrown in there. I thought of a lot of different opportunities of what Scapula was going to do with a hypnotized Gemini, and the love angle was the most strange and bizarre, and therefore I knew that's the one you gotta go with. Because taking a big monkey wrench and throwing it right into the storyline was my way of keeping things interesting. This goes back to the kind of making it up as you go along approach I had done with the original 2007 zine, and doing a lot of twists and turns was the way I had really wanted to do this, the ongoing serial continuity now, just to keep things interesting and to open up a lot of story opportunities. I had never imagined when I was doing this now that this particular Gemini was going to be such a major character. Again, like I had mentioned with Nas earlier, it was just one of those happy accidents that just a character who had almost been regarded as a throwaway would become such a major part of the Scapula series. Those of you guys who have read the book and the future books will know that this Gemini ends up becoming the deviant Gemini, who was probably, of all the Gemini clones that appeared in the series, that one was probably the most unique and the most memorable. Her relationship with Scapula would open up a lot of big opportunities, so this is one of those happy occasions where I did not write myself into a corner and actually got a lot of good future material out of just going with something that was totally out there. I guess that's a lesson for any comic readers out there. Challenge yourself, do really weird things, go right ahead, do big crazy steps, because sometimes it'll lead to pretty important developments. So go nuts! One last wrap up before we stop for the day. A little bit of an epilogue. Once again, more of that group's imagery. I'm so very sorry, but it had a lot of visual opportunities. Let's just go with that, the visuals. But of course, this page here was meant to bookend that very first page we had seen way back at the beginning of Boys Against Girls, with Scapula making his big promise that this was going to be the dawn of a new epoch of terror. Well, this was meant to show that those promises were going to start being paid off. This was the beginning of Scapula as a major villain, as a more competent menace, which was something I had wanted to do with him for a long time. It had to be earned. It had to be done gradually. It had to be done with stories that built up his menace and built up his intelligence and his ruthlessness and his competence. The days of screaming coward Scapula were over, and this led to a bunch of future stories that I think really were worth it. So, hail Scapula, and hail Scapula, world's worst villain. And that's our show. Thank you so very much for watching. Once again, World's Worst Villain and all the other books in the Scapula series are available in the Scapula bookstore off of my website. Your support really means a lot. And again, you can join us in on Patreon. Thank you so very much for watching, you guys. Keep being villainous.